The fourth theory is my personal favorite, symbolic convergence theory, which is also called fantasy theme analysis. So basically the premise of the theory is you get a shared identity by some of the stories you tell in a small group. So symbolic convergence theory, CST, how group members develop a shared sort of concept of themselves as a group. You probably had this before, some kind of fantasy in your group, maybe with your friends, maybe with your family, thinking about, hey, if I had a superpower, what superpower might I have? And then someone jumps in, oh, I'd like to fly. Another one, like, I'd like to have super strength. And then someone else chimes in, I'd like to be able to have X-ray vision. So these things talk about how you would have a superpower, and everyone sort of adds to it. Right? What would happen if I won the lottery? Oh, I'd go travel everywhere. No, I'd buy the most expensive cottage or house or car or something like that. So these fantasy themes really help get a group to develop some kind of cohesion and synergy. So the theory is sort of, again, one of my favorites because you see it happening all the time and things sort of chain out. So once someone starts, it becomes sort of a shared identity with the group. So Borman, and actually with his wife, I didn't know that until I started researching this, were the ones who sort of proposed this theory that this is how groups really become successful, is they don't focus solely on the tasks, they focus sometimes on the social aspect of the group, which builds that group cohesion and identity. So a fantasy theme, something happens, a story, a joke, maybe you're bored, maybe you're really stressed and someone sort of says something and all of a sudden it sort of starts to percolate, right? It catches on and members sort of build on it. And you can see this happening because people start to get more attentive, they start to get a little more excited, they talk a little more loudly, they talk a little more quickly. You can sort of see this happening. And all of a sudden there's some kind of symbol or anything like that. So we, some colleagues and I went to a conference and we were in Greece. And there's a lot of headless statues in Greece. Through a couple thousand years, they lose their arms, they lose their heads. So we talked about having a random torso, and we thought, oh, this would be a great name for a band, Random Torso. And we started to chain out and talk about this. So every time then we were in a museum or saw some kind of historic monument, hey, there's a random torso. So it was sort of a shared identity with us, right? And that view of reality then sort of helps us bond as a group and have that sort of family feeling. So a trigger, so something happens to trigger this sort of fantasy theme to start chaining out, right? Again, you can see the energy level rise as its chaining goes and continues. Then there's convergence as everyone in the group starts to participate. And this is what usually happens in a fantasy theme. Everyone participates because they sort of have fun with it, right? But not everyone fantasy chains, but sometimes it falls flat. Sometimes you'll say something and it doesn't go anywhere, so the chain kind of dies out. So again, the example here is a computer that someone's using for a group project, perhaps. They nickname the Beast because it constantly crashes or loses files. So another member was talking about it and maybe said something about the Beast eating their last file. So they have this idea of a convergence, the chaining begins. Someone in a group chat says the Beast strikes again because something they tried to upload didn't upload, and the Beast strikes again. Everyone gets it. They don't need to know what happened. They don't need to have that context because they already have that. And then this group starts to see ourselves as this team that survives the Beast. Right? So you build this in. So this is a scenario that might work for you or something that you might see. Right? So again, individually, think about a fantasy theme in your group and maybe happen this semester for these projects. That's something you might want to bring to bear then for the podcast at the end of the semester for the last quiz. So again, maybe as you're sort of working in a group, think about some of these fantasy themes and what they happen, and maybe jot down some notes so you can come back to this later. Again, it does really explain group cohesion and identity and sort of forecast what might happen. Again, I really like this theory because it's fun, it's easy to understand, you see it happen all the time. These fantasy themes sort of just chain out all the time when you're looking for them. Again, it's harder then to sort of predict when a fantasy theme will actually change. Sometimes they just sort of die out. And these are based on sort of qualitative. You really can't measure this, and you really can't sort of connect, hey, they had a really good fantasy theme chaining out in the group. Doesn't necessarily equal that your group's going to be successful or not. Right? So again, you build a shared identity with this fantasy theme. It chains out, builds that kind of identity for all of you in the team, and it sort of has these symbolic cues and all those kind of things that go on, and it really helps you with your group's shared sense of reality. So thank you very much. Have a good day.